Hey guys! Tonight we ease back nearly 1,000 years into a dim, stone-walled monastery where the air smells faintly of beeswax, damp stone, and stew that probably tasted better yesterday. You're stepping across uneven flagstones, the kind that make your ankles ache, and already you hear the whispering drip of wax-hitting clay dishes. This is not a place of neon signs or digital clocks. Instead, here, time itself seems to melt slowly in golden drops. You'll find yourself staring at one of the strangest but also most calming inventions, a candle clock. Yes, you, surrounded by silence, watch a flame shrink a tall stick of wax, and suddenly you know when it's time for prayer, for study, or, if you're lucky, for bread and cheese. It sounds peaceful, but let's be honest, you probably wouldn't last very long in this life. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night because a stick of wax said so. No snooze button, no excuses. Just you, the darkness, and a strict prior who looks like he hasn't smiled since the last crusade. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love knowing we're scattered across the world, all trying to drift off together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle deeper into the cloister, the hush wrapping around you like a blanket. The monks move deliberately, robes brushing against the stone. You notice the faint gleam of wax-coated fingers, some of them still sticky from twisting wicks earlier in the day. In this place, candles aren't just a source of light. They're the heartbeat of time itself. Without them, the long winter nights would stretch on forever, leaving prayer schedules hopelessly tangled. One mainstream historical fact. By the 12th century, monasteries across Europe leaned heavily on these wax markers of hours. They weren't always perfectly reliable. Wax dripped unevenly, drafts sped flames up, but compared to fumbling in darkness or waiting for dawn, candles were as good as precision watches. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some monasteries experimented with candles pre-etched with markings every inch or so. The trick? Each line burned down in about 20 minutes. In theory. In practice, you might get monks bickering about whether it was time for matins or if Brother Thomas just leaned too close and sped the process up with his warm breath. Historians still argue whether these candle clocks were ever truly standardized across Europe, or whether they were more symbolic. A gesture that said, time is passing rather than a dependable measure of it. Did a monastery in York follow the same burn rate as one in Florence? Nobody can quite agree. You pause and let yourself picture the glow. Tall wax pillars lined with tiny marks. The flame eating away line by line. Shadows stretch along the high stone arches. Each flicker making saints in stained glass appear to nod or frown. You imagine being the novice told to watch the candle and call out when it hit the next notch. Not exactly the medieval equivalent of a dream job. Still, it gave someone an excuse to sit and stare, half hypnotized by flame, while the rest carried heavy hymnals. And there's a gentle joke of the night. Imagine trying to use one of these candle clocks on a windy picnic. Don't worry, guys, I brought the timepiece. 5 minutes later, everyone's late for vespers and the potato stew is cold. You lean closer and hear the soft crackle. The faint hiss where melted wax meets moisture in the air. It's strangely soothing, a reminder that these monks lived in a rhythm where time wasn't something you checked on a glowing rectangle in your pocket, but something you smelled, saw, and felt. Hours weren't seconds ticking. They were wax thinning, shadows stretching. And as the wax shrinks, you sense the weight of centuries. People before you measuring their days not with gears but with flame. That tiny glow, steady and calm, pulling you ever deeper into the slow drift of history. You follow the monks into the heart of the cloister, where the rhythm of their days is laid out like sheet music, regular, predictable, and strict enough to make even the most disciplined modern planner feel like a slacker. The monastery is alive with order, prayer, labor, meals, study, silence, and then prayer again. Every moment has its assigned place, every action its approved slot. You can almost hear the invisible gears turning. Except here, the gears are human bodies moving to the soft tempo of candlelight. Imagine this. The day is sliced not into the neat hours and minutes you know, but into canonical hours, Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. That's 8. 8 sessions, no matter how short the winter day or how endless the summer light. Bells ring, candles burn, and you find yourself moving almost mechanically between chapel, fields, and scriptorium. The monks have been doing this for centuries. You're the newcomer, still fighting the urge to sneak in an afternoon nap. Here's a straightforward historical fact. Benedictine rule, which shaped monastic life across Europe, demanded this precise structure. Each canonical hour had its prayers, psalms, and chants. The purpose was to sanctify time itself, making every part of the day an offering. No idle gaps, no wandering hours. And here comes a quirky tidbit. Some monasteries were so obsessed with schedule that they invented knocker monks, assigned brothers who would go around waking up the others for nocturnal prayers. Picture a robed man armed with a wooden clapper, or even just a firm poke. Imagine being roused at 2 a.m. because a candle told him it was time to drag you into cold stone chapels for chanting. Better than an iPhone alarm? Debatable. Historians still argue whether this monastic rigidity produced genuine devotion or simply bleary-eyed compliance. Was every midnight psalm sung from the heart, or were some mumbled half asleep, lips moving automatically? The truth probably flickered somewhere in between, much like the candles guiding them. You watch as the monks file silently into the refectory. A single candle clock burns in a corner, its flame both illuminating the meal and measuring its length. When it hits the next mark, eating stops. Prayers resume. That's it. No chance for seconds, no leisurely dessert. You laugh to yourself. Here, even your appetite has a curfew. There's something strangely soothing about this predictability, though. The sense that you always know what's coming next, that the day can't surprise you too much. In our modern world, unpredictability is everywhere. Traffic jams, emails at midnight, phone calls you didn't want. But here, inside these thick monastery walls, the candle decides. The wax shortens and your schedule follows. Joke number 2 sneaks in. Imagine applying for a medieval HR position. Do you have experience with scheduling? Yes. I can stare at wax for hours. Honestly, you get hired. As the hours pass, you grow attuned to the rhythm. Bells marking the broader structure. Candles measuring the smaller beats. Together, they create a slow, hypnotic metronome. You breathe with it. Step by step, chant by chant. You realize you're surrendering to a time system not measured by machines but by fire and faith. And that's when the deeper truth hits you. In this world, time isn't yours to manage. It belongs to God, the monastery, and the flame. You're just drifting inside it, like wax melting drop by drop. You settle more deeply into this cloistered life, noticing something curious. For all their devotion, the monks still wrestle with a very human problem. How to actually keep track of time. Bells ring across valleys, yes, but bells must be rung by hands, and hands can be late. And mechanical clocks? Forget it. In the early centuries, those machines were unreliable, clunky, and prone to breaking down faster than a cheap modern washing machine. That's why candle clocks weren't just quaint. They were necessary. Here's the straight historical fact. The first mechanical tower clocks began appearing in Europe during the late 13th and early 14th centuries. But before then, precision timekeeping was elusive. Sundials worked when the sun was around. But as you probably guessed, monasteries ran on strict schedules even in the dead of night. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. A candle that burned steadily, predictably, marking time by the slow descent of flame. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some of these candle clocks were ingeniously marked not just with lines, but with embedded nails. As the candle burned down, the nails dropped onto a plate, making a little clink sound. Instant medieval alarm clock. Imagine being yanked out a holy daydream by the sudden clatter of metal on stone. Probably not as jarring as your modern phone buzzing on the nightstand, but still enough to get you moving. Historians still argue whether monks actually trusted these devices for strict scheduling, or they were more ceremonial, like lighting incense, a gesture both practical and symbolic. Was a candle a clock, or was a meditation tool, reminding you with every drip of wax that time, like life, burns away quietly? Nobody agrees completely. You stand near the scriptorium door, staring at one of these marked candles. Its wax is carefully notched, blackened lines baked in to measure increments. A monk assigned to watch it sits nearby, chin drooping toward his chest. His job? To call out when the wax reached the next division. Yours? To wonder what happens if he falls asleep. And here's your gentle joke of the night. Imagine telling your abbot, "Sorry, brother, I overslept because the candle burned crooked." That's a medieval equivalent of, "My Wi-Fi was down." Not exactly convincing. The flicker of flame shifts as a draft sneaks through the narrow window slit. Suddenly, the wax melts unevenly, dripping faster on one side than the other. The line you were waiting to burn through arrives 10 minutes too early. The bell rings. Everyone shuffles to prayer. Nobody complains. That's the point. You don't fight the candle. The candle is time. You realize how strange it feels to live in a world where the measurement of hours is flexible, flowing, almost poetic. Today, if your train is 1 minute late, chaos. Here, if your candle burns unevenly, you just shrug, pray earlier, and call it God will. And so you sink into this realization. The candle is both fragile and powerful. It fails easily, blown out, melted strangely, toppled in a draft. Yet it orders the life of dozens of men, shapes their prayers, their meals, their sleep. You see the paradox. Sometimes the weakest flame burns with the strongest authority. You wander into a smaller chamber that smells like a mix of honey, smoke, and something you can't quite place, rancid animal fat. This is a candle store, the beating heart of monastic timekeeping. Here, stacks of pale cylinders stand waiting, some golden and fragrant, others greasy and gray. The monks know the difference immediately, beeswax or tallow. And the choice between them isn't just about lighting. It's about class, money, and the simple comfort of breathing. Here's your straightforward historical fact. Beeswax candles were prized in monasteries and cathedrals because they burned with a cleaner, steadier flame. They didn't smoke as much, smelled faintly sweet, and dripped less erratically. But beeswax was expensive, often reserved for churches, nobles, or especially important rituals. Ordinary folk, and sometimes even less wealthy monasteries, relied on tallow, candles made from animal fat. Those smoked stank and attracted flies. You could almost hear the monks sigh when they had to use them. The quirky tidbit? In some cases, tallow candles actually dripped so aggressively that the wax pooled into grotesque shapes, which monks interpreted as signs or omens. Imagine praying earnestly, only to glance over and see what looks like a demon's face melting on your candle holder. Sleep tight, Brother Matthew. Historians still argue whether monasteries consistently use beeswax for timekeeping, or if they reserve it only for feasts and solemn vigils. Some records suggest wealthier abbeys splurge on wax imports, while smaller houses scrape by with smoky tallow. Was your candle clock a shimmering pillar of purity, or a smelly lump of animal fat? The answer depends entirely on the monastery's budget. You picture yourself sitting in the scriptorium, quill in hand, copying a psalm. The candle beside you burns bright and clean, the flame steady. Across the room, another novice squints through a fog of greasy smoke as his tallow candle sputters and spits. You'd better hope you were assigned to the nicer wax. Gentle joke number 1 in this section. Imagine modern luxury marketing for medieval candles. Now, with 30% less sheep fat aroma, you'd buy it just to survive a single prayer session without gagging. The choice of candle also carried symbolism. Beeswax, being made by the pure labor of bees, was often associated with virginity, holiness, and Christ himself. Tallow, by contrast, smelled of the butcher's yard, earthy and coarse. Using one or the other wasn't just economics. It was theology you could inhale, and you sense how the entire room was colored by that choice. Beeswax created a golden, almost heavenly glow on stone walls, the kind of light you'd expect in illuminated manuscripts. Tallow made shadows harsher, ceilings blackened and air heavy. In both cases, though, the flame still marked the passing of time, whether in sweetness or in stink. Another soft laugh sneaks in. You imagine monks holding their noses, praying faster just to escape the stench. Lord, hear our prayer, and please, let Brother Peter splurge on beeswax next time. As you breathe in, you realize you can almost smell it now, the duality of holiness and economy, honey and fat, purity and practicality. Each candle, whatever its origin, becomes more than light. It is discipline, schedule, devotion, and sacrifice, all melted into one. And slowly, as your eyelids droop with the flicker, you find yourself drifting with the wax. You pause in a long corridor. Eyes follow a row of candles lined with small, black marks scratched or inked into their pale sides. Each line is a promise. This much wax equals this much time. It's like staring at a primitive ruler, except instead of measuring inches or centimeters, it measures your very hours on Earth. Here's your firm historical fact. Monks often divided candles into increments, sometimes 12, sometimes 24, so that as the flame burned through each mark, it represented a half hour or an hour. The idea was that a single candle, burning evenly, could measure an entire night's vigil. The clock was quite literally melting before your eyes. Now for the quirky tidbit. In some monasteries, each line was painted with bright color, red, blue, or green. So even in dim chapels, you could spot the progress without leaning in too close. Others pressed little nails, beads, or strings into the wax at intervals. When the flame reached them, they dropped the plink onto a dish below. Congratulations! You've just invented the medieval version of a kitchen timer. Historians still argue whether these candles really burn consistently enough to be trusted. Drafts, impurities in wax, or even the tilt of the holder could throw things off. Some suggest that monks used them less as strict timekeepers and more as reminders. The night is passing. Prayers are due. Stay awake. Was it precision or symbolism? No consensus. Just more flickering shadows. You imagine yourself standing guard in the chapel at 2 a.m, eyes fixed on the slow burn of the flame. The wax shrinks. The mark approaches, and you fight the heavy weight of sleep pressing your eyelids. Your whole duty is to stay awake long enough to say, "They're brothers, it is time." Not the most glamorous job, but oddly hypnotic. Joke number 1 arrives. Imagine bringing one of these candles to a modern office. Deadlines at the 3rd mark. Susan, don't let it drip past lunch. Probably HR would not approve. The process of measuring hours with fire created an atmosphere unlike anything a digital clock could provide. The glow wasn't just illumination. It was a reminder of mortality, of life's fragility. Each drip of wax whispered, "Gone, gone, gone." Time wasn't invisible. It was puddling on the floor in little hardened drops. Sometimes you picture a monk tracing the cool drips with his finger after prayer. Almost like counting beads in a rosary, except these beads had fallen by chance, sculpted by flame. A soft ritual of noticing how many moments had already melted away. And your second chuckle for the section. What if 2 candles burn at different speeds? One monk insists it's terse, another swears it's sexed. Suddenly, you've invented medieval daylight savings time. Confusion included. You breathe in, taking in the smoky sweetness of beeswax, the faint hiss of burning tallow. You realize you're not just watching time pass. You're feeling it in sense, sight, sound. Candle clocks demanded attention, invited meditation, even as they betrayed you with quirks. And here, in this dim corridor, you accept that time measured by fire is never precise. But it is beautiful. You step quietly into scriptorium, the great writing hall where monks bend over desks, quills scratching against parchment in a rhythm that feels as old as the stones around you. The air is heavy with the scent of vellum. Ink made of oak galls, and of course, the ever-present glow of candle clocks standing at attention along the walls. Their flames flicker and sway, but their purpose is steady. To remind each scribe that time is slipping by even as he copies each line of sacred text. Here's your grounded historical fact. Medieval scriptoria often operated almost entirely by candlelight during winter months. Windows were narrow slits, designed more for defense than for sunlight, and the dim interiors needed artificial light to keep work going. Candle clocks became double-duty tools, providing not just illumination, but a metronome for hours of transcription. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some monks were notorious for doodling in the margins when they got bored or sleepy. Cat's jokes. Even cheeky drawings of fellow brothers sometimes slipped onto holy pages. You could imagine a tired scribe staring at the candle mark, knowing it 20 minutes before the next bell, and choosing to sketch a tiny grumpy face instead of another Latin verse. Somewhere in those flames, humor sneaked past the solemnity. Historians still argue whether candle clocks were practical in scriptoria, or if scribes mostly worked by larger communal lamps. Some manuscripts hint at individual work candles carefully marked, while others describe shared timekeepers watched by an appointed brother. The debate smolders like the flame itself. Was each scribe his own master of time, or was a whole room tied to a single candle's slow decline? You shuffle to a desk, sit down, and feel the scratch of quill in your hand. The candle beside you throws a small circle of light, barely enough to see the page. The flame trembles, casting long shadows that stretch over the ink pots and sand shakers. The silence is deep, broken only by an occasional cough, the drip of wax, and the faint shuffle of parchment. You sense how hypnotic it must have been, copying endless lines, the world shrinking to flame and page. Joke number 1 tonight. Imagine explaining to a modern boss, "Sorry, the report isn't finished. I ran out of wax." Honestly, not a bad excuse, and a lot prettier than computer crash. The candle also carried risk. Dripping wax could harden on the page, smudging precious words. Worse, a toppled candle could undo years of work in seconds. You realize why monks prayed constantly. One careless elbow and eternity scripture went up in flames. Yet still, they trusted the candle enough to make it their timekeeper, their companion through endless hours of ink. As you watch the flame inch down past another black mark, you notice how your breathing falls into rhythm with it. Each second is softened, melted into something you can feel rather than count. Your eyes grow heavy, not just from the effort of imagined transcription, but from the mesmerizing glow. Candle time is slow, patient, forgiving, and gentle joke number 2. Maybe that's why so many monks drew little cats in the margins. Who else but a candlelit scribe would invent medieval memes? You find yourself in the chapel now, where the air is thick with incense and silence. The only sounds are the soft shuffling of sandals on stone and the faint drip of wax from tall candles perched in iron stands. This is the vigil, the long watch that stretches through the night. The monks gather, their robes brushing, their voices blending in chants that echo like waves in a cavern. And in the middle of it all, a single candle clock burns steadily, telling them when one prayer ends and the next begins. Here's your grounded historical fact. Monastic vigils were divided into specific intervals of psalms and readings, each carefully timed. Since mechanical clocks were not yet reliable, monks depended on candle clocks to know when to shift from one chant to another. The flame wasn't just light. It was a conductor of a nightly symphony. The quirky tidbit? Some monasteries had candles with pins set at intervals. So when the wax burned down, the pins would fall into a metal tray with a ping. That sharp little sound would signal a new section of prayer. Imagine chanting softly when suddenly, plink, a pin interrupts like a medieval triangle in the orchestra. Subtle, but effective. Historians still argue whether these prayer intervals were always as exact as the rules suggested. Did monks truly move seamlessly from one psalm to the next at the perfect candle mark? Or did sleepy eyes and drafty chapels make timing more flexible? The debate continues, because records describe both strict adherence and occasional "God will forgive us" adjustments. You picture yourself kneeling on the cold stone floor, trying to focus on the chants, while secretly watching the flame. Each notch that melts feels like a mile marker on a dark road. You count the drips, you measure the shadows, and slowly, you surrender to rhythm. Prayer, silence. Prayer again. Joke number 1 for this section. Imagine if your fitness tracker buzzed every time a candle pin dropped. Congratulations, you've unlocked 300 Hail Marys. You'd set a medieval record in no time. But there's something almost magical about this arrangement. The flame sets the pace, not human whim. You don't argue with the candle. You simply follow its guidance. When the flame says sing, you sing. When it says kneel, you kneel. There's comfort in that surrender. Even as your knees complain against the hard floor, you glance around and notice how each monk seems both weary and serene, their faces half-lit, half-shadowed. Time doesn't feel like numbers here. It feels like a slow tide, rolling in and out with every flicker. Gentle joke number 2 drifts in. Imagine a monk half asleep, jolted awake by the pin's clink, mumbling the wrong psalm until the brother next to him elbows him sharply. Some things never change. There's always one guy dozing in the back row, And as the chanting swells and fades, you sense that the candle is both fragile and eternal. Each flame burns out, yes, but another is lit, another vigil kept. The rhythm never ends. Time, devotion, and wax melt together into one soft, flickering glow. You wander from the chapel back into workshop, where innovation quietly simmers. Not every monk was content with a plain candle marked by scratches. Some tinkered, experimented, added odd features to make their wax timepieces more reliable. You notice half-finished sticks lying on a table, some with strange wires sticking out, others lumpy with hidden surprises. It's like stumbling into a medieval inventor's garage. Here's your straightforward historical fact. Records from both European and Asian traditions mention modifications to candles for timekeeping, weight spells, and even color markers to signal transitions. In monasteries, these ideas were borrowed and adapted to keep strict schedules running, especially during long, drowsy vigils. And the quirky tidbit? A few monks embedded tiny metal balls or weights into the wax at intervals. As the candle burned down, the balls dropped onto plates below with a sharp clink. Think of it as the earliest snooze alarm. Except there was no snooze, just a reminder to get back to chanting. Some even-tied threads to the weights, so they could tug a bell as they fell. Primitive, yes, but also clever. Historians still argue whether these inventive modifications were widely used or just isolated oddities mentioned in chronicles. Were they clever gimmicks, or actual daily tools in monasteries? Some suggest the descriptions might even be exaggerated. Monks showing off their creativity in manuscripts rather than building prototypes for everyday use. You picture yourself standing in that workshop, a curious monk guiding you. This candle will ring a bell at the third mark. He lights it proudly, and you both wait. Eventually, a faint metallic plink echoes in the chamber, startling a brother down the hall, who drops his quill in surprise. Practical? Maybe. Amusing? Absolutely. Joke number 1 writes itself. Imagine marketing these as luxury timepieces, now with 6 precision alarms and a bonus wax fragrance. Medieval Apple Watch, anyone? The air here smells sharper, a blend of molten wax and singed thread. Your fingers feel sticky as you help twist a wick into its slot. Watching the experiments, you realize how deeply humans crave control over time. Even monks, supposedly devoted to surrendering their lives to God, wanted little tools to keep them awake, alert, and punctual. Gentle joke number 2. You think about the poor novice whose job it was to reset the tray of fallen pins all night. Imagine his muttered prayers. Lord, give me strength and fewer falling nails. The innovations didn't always succeed, of course. Wax warped, bells failed, thread snapped. Yet the effort mattered. These strange contraptions were testimonies to a restless curiosity. The same curiosity that would eventually build water clocks, then mechanical clocks, and centuries later, the ticking wristwatch you now take for granted. You lean close to one of the experimental candles, flame trembling against its next embedded weight. You hold your breath, waiting. A faint clatter rings out, and suddenly you feel it. The pulse of ingenuity, flickering quietly in a cloister centuries ago. You step into a side chapel, and the first thing that greets you isn't the stone arches or the carved wooden benches. It's the smell, not the musty damp of cloisters, but something warmer, richer, beeswax. The fragrance drifts through the air like honey baked into sunlight. One candle clock stands tall on an iron stand, glowing gold, and suddenly you realize why these were more than timekeepers. They were sensory anchors, weaving light, scent, and devotion into one. Here's your historical fact. Beeswax candles burn cleaner and brighter than tallow, producing less smoke and fewer drips. That's why churches, monasteries, and wealthier chapels prize them for rituals and night vigils. Their glow was steady, their light gentle, and their smell, well, far more tolerable than the greasy odor of animal fat. And the quirky tidbit? Some monks claim the scent itself helped them stay focused in prayer. In an age without scented candles from the local store, beeswax was as close as you got to aromatherapy, a sweet smell rising to heaven along with the chanting. It gave worship a sensory depth, a feeling that God might be just a little more attentive if your prayers smelled nice. Historians still argue whether beeswax was widely available or a luxury confined to cathedrals and wealthy abbeys. Some suggest that only the richest monasteries could afford to burn beeswax for long vigils, while smaller ones had to endure the smoky stench of tallow. Was the sweet smell the norm for monks, or just a rare treat? The evidence flickers both ways. You imagine yourself kneeling in the quiet, the golden glow softening the hard edges of the stone. The shadows stretch long, but the air feels less oppressive, almost comforting. The scent clings to your robe, to your fingers, and you realize time itself smells different here. Each hour is not only seen, but inhaled. Joke number 1 drifts in. Imagine a medieval monk trying to sell beeswax candles at the marketplace. Trust me, brother, these will make your prayers 30% more effective. The pitch might have worked. After all, who would want holier smelling hours? The more you breathe it in, the more you understand the symbolism. Beeswax, created by the tireless labor of bees, was considered pure, natural, and holy. A flame fed by bees was a flame fed by creation itself, burning brightly in the presence of God. To light such a candle wasn't just practical, it was theological, a glowing sermon in wax. Gentle joke number 2 slides in. You picture a novice secretly enjoying the smell so much that he lingers too close, singes his sleeve, and has to explain why his robe now smells of roasted wool. That's one way to ruin the divine ambience. As the candle clock burns lower, the sweet aroma thickens, wrapping you like a blanket. The flame shrinks, the wax drips, and yet you feel lifted, lighter. Time passes not as cold, hard minutes, but as honey-scented air. And in that, you find peculiar beauty of monastic hours. Even waiting felt like prayer. The winter wind presses against the thick stone walls, but inside the monastery, all you feel is a heavy blanket of darkness. Winter here is no joke. The sun slips away in late afternoon, and the nights stretch on endlessly, long enough to swallow you whole. Without the candle clocks, the monks would drown in that darkness, unable to measure the slow creep of hours. Here's your solid historical fact. In Northern Europe, winter nights could last 15 to 16 hours. For monks bound to strict prayer schedules, that meant multiple vigils, waking periods, and study sessions in pitch-black hours. Candle clocks became lifelines, cutting the vast unknown of night into manageable slices. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some monasteries kept not just one, but whole rows of candles burning through the night. When one reached its last notch, another was lit immediately, almost like passing a baton in a slow, waxy relay race. Imagine a solemn game of timekeeping where the stakes weren't medals, but making sure you didn't miss matins at 3 in the morning. Historians still argue whether the sheer length of winter nights forced monks into more sleep or more prayer. Some argue they must have napped in shifts, while others claim they stuck doggedly to the 8 canonical hours, regardless of fatigue. Which was it? The records don't always agree, leaving us to wonder whether half the choir was secretly asleep during those endless chants. You wrap your robe tighter and picture yourself standing in the dormitory, hearing the scratch of wind through shutters. The candle glows steadily beside the bedrolls, reminding you it will take 6 more hours to reach dawn. Time feels heavier in winter, as though the flame has more weight to carry. Gentle joke number 1. You imagine a monk yawning, whispering, "Surely, brother, God won't mind if we just skip this round. It's basically still night." Sadly for him, the candle disagrees. The candle's light also reshaped the mood of the monastery. In summer, you could rise with the sun. In winter, you rose with flame, your entire existence bound to wax. A flickering glow guided your prayers, your study, your meals, and even your most private thoughts. The night wasn't endless after all. The candle kept time, kept you sane, even as snow pressed against the cloister walls. Joke number 2 drifts in. Picture 2 monks arguing. My candle burns faster, so dawn must be near. No, brother, that just means you left it too close to the drafty window. Medieval disputes over bedtime, cozier than you'd expect. You exhale slowly, feeling the weight of the season settle around you. Outside, wolves might howl in forests, peasants shiver in huts, but here in the cloister, the flame draws boundaries around the darkness. Each drip of wax is a step forward. Each flicker whispers, you are still moving through night. And slowly, with the glow as your companion, you endure the long, cold hours of winter, one melted into the time. You shuffle forward into the rhythm of the seasons, and suddenly summer sunlight pours into your imagination. The walls are the same, the chants the same, but the air feels different, warm, bright, stretched with hours of daylight that refuse to end. The monks still follow their candle clocks, but now the problem flips. Too much light, too little night. Here's your straightforward historical fact. Medieval Europe measured canonical hours regardless of the season, which meant in some of the intervals between prayers sometimes shifted, compressing or stretching unnaturally. Candle clocks, designed to divide a predictable night, struggled against days that began before 5 a.m. and lingered past 9 p.m. And the quirky tidbit? Some monasteries tried adjusting the size of the candles according to season. In winter, they burned thick, long sticks. In summer, shorter ones. Yet monks joke that no matter what, the candles never seem to match the actual flow of daylight. You can picture one grumpy brother muttering, "The sun isn't cooperating again." Historians still argue whether seasonal adjustments were formalized or improvised. Did abbots truly redesign the candles every solstice, or did they just let the flame drift as a loose guide while bells and human judgment fill the gaps? Evidence points both ways, leaving the scholarly debate to smolder like an uneven wick. You imagine yourself at prime in midsummer, the chapel still glowing with natural sunlight. A candle clock flickers uselessly beside the altar, its flame barely visible. You squint, wondering if anyone even notices in the glare. Time feels off, stretched like taffy. Too much day, not enough night to tuck into tidy candle divisions. Gentle joke number one. Picture a monk sarcastically saying, "Ah yes, Brother Candle, do tell us when to sleep while the sun is still blazing in our faces." But even in summer, candles weren't abandoned. They offered consistency, a psychological anchor when nature felt unruly. Monks trusted wax to remind them that human time and divine time weren't the same as the sun's whims. A small flame could still dictate when to chant, eat, or rest, even if daylight mocked it. And here's joke number two. Imagine a novice trying to sneak in an extra nap by claiming the candle ran faster than the sun. Good luck convincing your abbot of that one. As you sit in the cloister garden, bees buzzing lazily over herbs, you realize the irony. The very creatures making honeycomb for wax were also buzzing around the monastery's flowers. Their labor gave monks the material to outweep both summer's endless brightness and winter's smothering dark. You exhale, feeling the steady reassurance of flame even when the seasons play their tricks. The candle may not always be accurate, but it always burns. And in that constancy, monks found peace. You drift now into the chapter trade, where candles themselves become treasures. The monastery isn't just a place of prayer. It's a small economy humming quietly behind high walls. Beeswax doesn't appear magically in great stacks. It has to be harvested, refined, and in many cases imported. Suddenly, a candle clock isn't just a timekeeper. It's a luxury item, a symbol of connection to the far-flung world beyond cloister gates. Here's your steady historical fact. By the High Middle Ages, beeswax was an expensive commodity, sometimes shipped across regions from places where beekeeping thrived. Monasteries purchased or bartered for wax from markets and towns, paying dearly because its clean, bright burn was considered worthy of sacred spaces. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some abbeys received wax donations as part of tithes. Picture a farmer trudging in with jars of honey and chunks of wax, mumbling that it was easier to part with this than with grain. For monasteries, it was a sweet deal. Literally, wax fueled devotion, but also fueled timekeeping. Without it, the candle clocks would sputter out into greasy tallow chaos. Historians still argue whether monasteries hoarded beeswax primarily for liturgical splendor, or if it was regularly fed into their humble candle clocks. Some argue candle clocks consumed too much precious wax to be practical. Others counter that discipline required them regardless of cost. The truth probably lies in between. Special abbeys could afford the indulgence, while poorer houses measured time in smoke and smell instead. You imagine yourself walking through a medieval market square. Stalls of fabric, spices, dried fish, and then a merchant proudly offering blocks of golden beeswax, smooth and sweet-smelling. A monk haggles quietly, clutching coins donated by villagers. The exchange seems mundane, but in reality, he's buying time itself. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine a cheeky merchant pitching wax as though refined jewelry. Brother, this candle will not only light your prayers, but make you smell less like a stable. Effective marketing, if ever there was. And then you picture the journey of wax. Harvested from buzzing hives, carted in wagons, melted down, molded into long pale columns, carried into the monastery, and finally set to burn as a measure of prayer. Each drip is a drip of trade, travel, and toil. Each hour that passes has already passed through countless hands before reaching the flame. Gentle joke number 2. Imagine monks nervously calculating. At this rate of chanting, we'll burn through half our annual budget in wax before Advent. Candle clocks, where theology meets accounting. As you breathe in, the scent of beeswax feels richer now, threaded with distant lands, trade routes, and human effort. You realize that timekeeping here is never just about the flame. It's about connections, the invisible web linking hives, farmers, merchants, abbeys, and finally, sleepy monks chanting in the night, all of them wrapped into the soft light of one candle clock. You slip into the workroom where candle making takes place, and the atmosphere feels strangely alive. Warm air thick with the smell of melted wax, pots simmering over small fires, and monks bustling like bees themselves. You see long wicks dangling from rods, dipped over and over until they fatten into cylinders. This is labor, plain and gritty, but it is also the foundation of monastic timekeeping. Here is your grounded historical fact. Medieval candlemaking followed a repetitive process called dipping. Wicks were lowered into melted wax or tallow, pulled out, cooled, then dipped again dozens of times until a proper thickness was achieved. Each stick represented hours of slow, meticulous labor, just as much as any psalm or manuscript. And your quirky tidbit. Some monks, while dipping candles, recited prayers or sang hymns, turning the chore into another form of devotion. Others reportedly told jokes in low whispers, since candle making was one of the rare tasks where conversation wasn't strictly forbidden. Imagine the laughter echoing among pots of bubbling fat and golden wax, a break in the silence that ruled most other hours. Historians still argue whether monasteries produced all their own candles or relied heavily on outside guilds. Some records suggest large abbeys had entire candle-making workshops, while smaller houses likely purchased them from towns. The debate flickers like the flames themselves, self-sufficiency or outsourcing. The evidence varies by region and century. You crouch beside one of the pots, watching as a novice carefully dips his wick, his fingers already sticky, his robe spattered with flecks of wax. He sighs, lifts the dripping strand, and hangs it on a rack, only to repeat the motion again, and again, and again. Hours melt away in a rhythm as hypnotic as chanting. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine if medieval monks had Fitbit trackers. This task alone would rack up 10,000 wrist dips before noon. The work is harder than it looks. Beeswax must be purified, strained of debris, melted at the right temperature, cooled at the right pace. Too fast and the candle cracks. Too slow and it sags. A crooked candle can't measure time properly. It burns unevenly, throwing schedules into chaos. In a place obsessed with discipline, a lopsided candle is no small sin. Gentle joke number 2. You picture a monk defending himself. No! Brother Prior, I didn't ruin the vigil schedule. The candle is merely expressing divine creativity. Somehow, you doubt that excuse went over well. And as you stand among the racks of drying candles, their surfaces glossy and smooth, you realize these aren't just sticks of wax. They are hours, frozen in solid form, waiting to melt into order and devotion. Each candle is both work and prayer, labor and light, destined to dissolve into time itself. The workshop hums softly, a chorus of bubbling pots and dripping wax. You breathe in the faint sweetness, feel the stickiness on your palms, and accept that here, in this simple, repetitive craft, monks shape not just light, but the very rhythm of their lives. You step into the treasury room, where shelves of finished candles stand like soldiers on parade. Some are tall and elegant, smooth pillars ready for feast days. Others are squat, everyday sticks destined to melt away in silence. The sight makes you pause, because here, time itself is stacked in neat rows. Future hours already formed, waiting patiently to be burned. Here's your firm historical fact. Candles were expensive. A single beeswax candle could cost more than a day's wages for a common laborer. For monasteries, every inch of wax consumed was a financial choice. When you lit a candle clock, you weren't just marking time. You were literally spending money, watching silver turn into puddles of wax. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some abbots kept detailed ledgers of candle usage, noting exactly how much wax was consumed at vigils, meals, or feast days. Imagine pages of careful math. 2 inches for prime, 3 for lauds, and Brother John clearly left his candle too close to a draft again. A medieval version of your monthly utility bill. Historians still argue whether the cost of candles ever restricted prayer schedules or forced monks to cut corners. Did abbeys shorten vigils during lean years to conserve wax? Or was devotion considered worth every coin? Some suggest flexibility. Others insist faith demanded sacrifice. No consensus. Only wax stains on old records. You picture yourself holding one of these tall beeswax candles. Smooth and slightly warm to the touch. It feels like holding gold. You hesitate before lighting it, knowing that every second of flame eats away at wealth. You glance at a brother nearby, his lips tightening as he watches the wax drip. Like a miser watching coins fall into the gutter. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine monks complaining like modern roommates. Who left the candle burning all night? Do you think wax grows on trees? The expense shaped monastic habits. Candles were rationed, distributed carefully. Sometimes monks worked in pairs at a single flame, leaning close together to copy their manuscripts. Other times, they relied on the moonlight to save wax, squinting in the pale glow like students too stubborn to pay for decent lamps. Gentle joke number 2. You imagine a monk try to explain his overspending. It wasn't me, Father. The candle was just extra holy and burned twice as fast. Not the strongest offense in an abbot's court. As you run your hand along the stacked candles, you realize each one carries not just light, but value, both spiritual and economic. They are sacrifices, offerings, and investments rolled into wax. And when they burn as clocks, they remind you that time is never free. Every hour measured by flame is also an hour purchased, paid from the quiet currency of bees and toil. The thought lingers as the glow dims around you. Time, money, devotion, melted together into one slow, golden drip. You slip into a quiet side chamber and notice something peculiar. A candle clock notched carefully with intervals, but each mark is paired with a tiny contraption. Metal balls perched delicately in the wax, ready to tumble when the flame eats its way down. You lean closer, fascinated. This isn't just a candle. It's a medieval mashup of fire and sound. Here's your grounded historical fact. Some surviving records describe candle clocks designed with bells or chimes attached. As the wax burned, weighted objects embedded inside would eventually drop, striking a small plate or bell. These candle bells serve as audible signals, ensuring monks knew when to shift prayers, even if their eyes were closed in meditation. The quirky tidbit? One ingenious design supposedly tied threads to tiny hammers. As the flame melted the wax and released the tension, the hammer swung and struck a bell. Imagine dozing off during your vigil, only to be startled awake by a softing courtesy of a flaming candle alarm. Functional, yes, but also unintentionally comedic. Historians still argue whether these candle bells were widespread or more like novelty experiments in wealthy abbeys. Were they genuinely useful, or were they half-forgotten inventions mentioned once in manuscripts and exaggerated later? The debate continues, flicker with uncertainty, like the very flames they describe. You picture yourself kneeling in the chapel, chanting softly. Suddenly, plink, a metal ball drops into a dish. Heads turn, voices stumble, and then everyone resumes as though nothing happened. You smile to yourself. Even in solemn devotion, timekeeping occasionally made for slapstick. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine monks rating these devices like apps. 3 stars. Woke me up, but bell was too loud. The ingenuity behind these contraptions shows how determined humans are to control time. Monks weren't content to simply watch wax melt. They wanted sound, reminders, alerts. A medieval push notification, if you will, delivered in molten wax. And gentle joke number 2 sneaks in. You imagine a novice assigned to reset the fallen balls after every service. Congratulations, brother. You've been promoted to official medieval timekeeper/ball picker-upper. Not the kind of glory he had in mind when he joined. You let the sound echo in your imagination. The faint chime ringing through stone halls, mixing with chant and silence. The candle doesn't just mark time anymore. It announces it, insists upon it. Hours no longer slip by unseen. They arrive with a gentle clang, turning abstract minutes into something you can't ignore. As the last ball falls and the flame shrinks lower, you realize the candle has become both clock and companion, whispering with light, reminding with sound. In its humble way, it transforms silence into rhythm, devotion into measured intervals. You drift into the cloister garden, and the night air feels cooler here. A single candle clock sits in a niche by the walkway, its faint glow flickering against the stone. You pause, listening not only to the flame but to the centuries of arguments it has sparked, not between monks, but between the historians who came later. Here's your grounded historical fact. Written references to candle clocks appear in several medieval sources, describing their use in monasteries to divide vigils and prayers. Yet the details are inconsistent, leaving much to interpretation. Some manuscripts emphasize accuracy, while others mention them only in passing, as though their precision wasn't taken too seriously. Now for the quirky tidbit. One chronicler described candles that supposedly measured time so perfectly that monks never missed a single psalm. Another, however, complained that the wax burned unpredictably, sometimes rushing through a mark in minutes, other times dragging on for ages. It's like reading medieval Yelp reviews. 5 stars from one abbey, 2 stars from another. Historians still argue whether candle clocks were practical timekeepers or mostly symbolic, reminding monks of the passing hours without guaranteeing precision. Were they the backbone of monastic routine, or just one of many tools used alongside bells, sundials, and instinct? The debate flickers endlessly, as uneven as the flames themselves. You picture yourself leaning against the cold wall, overhearing the monks debate softly in Latin. Brother, the candle says it is time. No, brother, God's Son says otherwise. Neither is entirely wrong, and both probably shrug before returning to their prayers. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine medieval scholars holding conferences. Our topic today: does wax burn evenly? Lunch is served at the 4th notch. Some things never change. You realize the beauty is not in whether the candles were perfectly accurate, but in the way they embodied discipline. Even if the flame lied occasionally, monks still followed it, still let wax shape their days. The candle clock was as much a symbol of surrender as it was a measure of hours. Gentle joke number 2. You imagine a sleepy novice trying to settle an argument by blowing the candle out entirely. Problem solved, brothers. Now, nobody knows the time. He'd probably be reassigned to latrine duty within the hour. The candle flickers lower as you linger in the garden. Shadows dance against the arches, the smell of herbs drifting in on the breeze. You realize that history, like the flame, isn't always steady. It wavers, it tricks, it forces debates that last centuries. Yet it still glows, still draws you closer, even when you're not sure how much truth it holds. You find yourself back in a refectory, where the monks gather for their meals. The long wooden tables stretch down the hall, bowls of porridge and bread laid neatly in rows. A single candle clock burns at the head table, its flame quietly reminding everyone that even meals are rationed not by appetite, but by wax. Here's your grounded historical fact. In many monasteries, meals were conducted in silence, accompanied only by readings from scripture or the lives of saints. The candle clock ensured that eating didn't linger longer than devotion allowed. Once the flame reached its mark, spoons were set down, bowls cleared, and prayers resumed. And the quirky tidbit? Some abbeys reportedly measured meals by burning a single mark candle, no matter how many courses were served. If you were slow to chew your tough rye bread, tough luck, your portion time was literally melting away in front of you. Imagine staring at the flame while trying to gnaw through a dried fish. Not exactly fine dining. Historians still argue whether these meal timers were used universally or only in stricter houses. Some evidence suggests that in less rigid monasteries, meals were simply ended by a bell. Others insist a candle clock was a symbol of discipline at the table, a reminder that food was sustenance, not indulgence. You picture yourself seated among the brothers, wooden spoon in hand. The porridge is plain, the bread dense, the fish salty. But the candle adds a strange sense of ceremony as it burns. So dear opportunities for another bite. You eat with quiet urgency, half praying you finish before the wax runs out. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine a monk whispering, "Brother, hurry, the candle is halfway down," and the novice replying, "I've barely soaked my bread." The medieval version of fast food. The glow of the candle softens the atmosphere, though shadows fall across the faces of the brothers, making the meal feel both solemn and intimate. The steady flame ties every spoonful to the passage of time, reminding you that eating itself is part of devotion. Gentle joke number 2. You think of modern buffets, endless food, endless time, and chuckle at the contrast. Here, the flame dictates your portion size. Candlelight diet plan, guaranteed results. As the flame dips to its next mark, the prior raises his hand. Bowls are pushed aside, spoons laid down. Silence deepens. The candle has spoken. The meal is over, and you feel the odd mixture of hunger and reverence, a reminder that even the simplest bread, when measured by fire, becomes holy. You follow the monks back into their dormitory, where rows of simple wooden beds line the hall. The room is chilly, blankets thin, but nobody complains. Sleep doesn't belong entirely to the monks. It belongs to the schedule, and the schedule belongs to the candle. At the far end of the room, one tall candle clock burns steadily, and you realize with a sigh that it isn't guiding them to rest, but preparing to wake them again. Here's your grounded historical fact. Monastic rules required prayers at night, most famously matins, often around 2 or 3 in the morning. The candle clock helped measure when that awkward wake-up call should happen. When the wax melted to a certain notch, bells rang, and monks dragged themselves from half-dreams into stone chapels to chant. And the quirky tidbit? In some houses, novices were tasked with watching the candle, so they could alert the community at the right moment. Imagine being the unlucky young monk whose whole night hinged on not nodding off while staring at a flame. If you doze for even a few minutes too long, 50 groggy brothers might be stumbling in late to matins. Not the kind of mistake you'd want on your record. Historians still argue whether these midnight vigils were truly observed with military precision. Some sources suggest strict adherence, while others hint that abbots quietly allowed a bit of leeway in winter, when the body simply couldn't take constant interruptions. Was it unwavering discipline or flexible mercy? The debate still smolders. You picture yourself curled under a scratchy blanket, drifting towards sleep, only to hear a faint plink as a pin drops in the candle into its dish. The signal is clear. Up you get. You groan inwardly, rubbing your eyes, and shuffle with the rest of the brothers toward the chapel. The wax has spoken. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine monks comparing their midnight wake-ups like modern gym goers. You only got up twice? I managed 3 vigils last night. Spiritual bragging rights, medieval style. The walk to the chapel in the dark is its own kind of meditation. The halls echo with quiet footsteps, the cold biting your bare toes, the faint light of the candle leading the way. It feels surreal, almost dreamlike, as though you're wandering between waking and sleeping worlds. Gentle joke number 2. You imagine one exhausted novice whispering, "If God really wanted us awake at 2 a.m., he'd have invented coffee by now." You almost want to pat him on the shoulder in sympathy. And yet, as the monks gather again in the chapel, voices rising in chants, you realize why they kept at it. The candle clock didn't just pull them from sleep. It pulled them into rhythm, into unity. Time wasn't theirs to hoard but to share, to burn together in light and prayer. And so, night after night, the flame continued its quiet work, dragging the monastery into devotion while the rest of the world slept. You linger in the chapel after the midnight chants, the quiet heavy around you. The candle clock still burns, its flame small but steady, and suddenly you notice how the monks look at it. Not just as a tool, but as a symbol. To them, this little flame is more than melted wax. It's a metaphor. Here's your solid historical fact. In Christian tradition, candles often symbolize purity, sacrifice, and the soul burning before God. The flame represented divine presence, while the wax, consumed slowly, was compared to the body offering itself in devotion. In monasteries, this symbolism overlapped naturally with the candle's role as a timekeeper. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some sermons in the Middle Ages even compared monks themselves to candles, bodies burning away in discipline, illuminating the world with their devotion. You can almost hear a weary brother muttering, "Yes, but this candle doesn't have sore knees from kneeling all night." Historians still argue whether the symbolism developed primarily in monasteries or was absorbed from broader church rituals. Did monks invent the candle as sole imagery because they lived with wax so intimately, or did they borrow from sermons preached across Christendom? Either way, the idea caught fire, literally and figuratively. You picture yourself kneeling before the candle, your own shadow stretching long across the floor. Each drip of wax feels like a reminder that life itself is finite, burning down inch by inch. Time isn't abstract here. It's visible, tangible, melting away in front of you. And strangely, that realization doesn't frighten you. It soothes you. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine a monk being told, "Brother, you are like a candle." He sighs, "Yes, always burning at both ends and never enough wax." Relatable even across centuries. The candle symbolism also connected the monks more deeply to their tasks. Copying manuscripts wasn't just tedious work. It was shining light into darkness. Prayers at midnight weren't interruptions. They were offerings of time, transformed into flame. Even the exhaustion felt like part of the sacrifice. Each yawn another drop of wax spent. Gentle joke number 2. Picture a novice trying to impress his abbot with a metaphor. "Father, I too am like a candle." The abbot glances at him and replies dryly, "Yes, brother, mostly smoke." As the candle clock lowers toward its final mark, the chapel grows quieter, shadows thicker. You realize the monks weren't just measuring hours with wax. They were measuring meaning, finding in each flame a reminder of what it meant to live, to serve, to let yourself melt for something beyond yourself. The wax gives, the flame glows, and you drift deeper into the rhythm of time sanctified by fire. You wander slowly through the nave, where tall stone arches loom overhead. The space feels vast, and yet the only thing filling it is the soft flicker of candlelight. A row of candle clocks sits near the choir stalls, their flames painting long shadows that bend across the vaulted ceilings. You pause, noticing how the architecture itself seems to respond to the glow, shapes stretching, corners dissolving, carvings of saints shifting expressions as the light trembles. Here's your grounded historical fact. Medieval churches and monasteries were built with an understanding of light. Architects positioned windows, altars, and niches in ways that amplified sunlight by day and candlelight by night. Candle clocks didn't just measure time. They influenced the entire mood of the building, shaping how prayer and devotion unfolded in sacred spaces. And the quirky tidbit? Some accounts suggest monks even arranged candle clocks strategically to cast shadows that lined up with important symbols or altars at particular hours. It wasn't precise science, but the idea that shadows could act as companions to prayer gave the candles a dual purpose, marking hours and painting meaning across stone. Historians still argue whether these architectural shadow clocks were intentional design or just happy accidents noticed later. Did masons deliberately build chapels to harness flickering light? Or did monks reinterpret the effects long after construction? The debate lingers like a wavering flame in a draft. You sit quietly on a wooden bench, staring at the ceiling as the candles work their magic. Each flame seems tiny, but together they reshape the entire room, turning heavy stone into a living, breathing organism. The arches rise higher, the saints appear closer. The whole space hums with quiet rhythm of light and shadow. Gentle joke number 1. You imagine a monk proudly pointing out, "See, brother, the shadow of St. Peter's nose always appears at Sext." His companion squints, unimpressed. "It looks more like a donkey's ear." The play of light made worship feel alive. Candles softened the hard edges of architecture, reminded the monks that time wasn't just counted but experienced in their environment. The candle clock wasn't only a device, it was an artist painting fleeting masterpieces on the walls. Gentle joke number 2. Picture a novice accidentally moving the candle stand and ruining the whole alignment. Brother, where's St. Peter's shadow? Currently on the ceiling, chasing the pigeons. Not exactly the intended symbolism. As you lean back, watching the arches breathe with flame, you realize how candle clocks shaped more than schedules. They shaped space, mood, imagination. The building itself seemed to inhale with the light and exhale with the shadows. And you, sitting there, feel yourself exhaling too, drifting deeper into the glow, as though the monastery walls themselves are lulling you toward sleep. You drift into the library, a long, vaulted chamber lined with wooden shelves and filled with the musky scent of parchment and leather bindings. The silence here is deep in the chapels, as though every book absorbs sound. Yet even here, the candle clock holds its quiet authority. A tall wax column stands on a desk, its flame creating a trembling halo around piles of scrolls and codices. Here's your grounded historical fact. Medieval libraries were often dim, with narrow windows and limited natural light. Monks studying at night or during winter relied on candles, and the candle clock gave them a way to divide reading or copying into manageable sessions. Light wasn't just for illumination, it was the meter of scholarship. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some manuscripts still preserve wax drips across their pages, hardened blobs that testify to long nights under flickering light. Scholars joke that these stains are the fingerprints of medieval insomnia, where a drowsy monk's candle betrayed him with a sudden tilt. Imagine centuries later, researchers squinting at a psalm partly obscured by an accidental wax puddle. Historians still argue whether monasteries permitted individual study candles freely or rationed them tightly due to cost. Was every monk allowed his own flame to read by, or did abbots demand shared candles to preserve precious wax? Surviving rules differ, leaving the picture blurred like a text read in bad light. You imagine sitting at a desk, your fingers tracing the vellum page, the candle beside you shrinking notch by notch. Your reading isn't measured by chapters, but by inches of wax. You know that when the flame reaches the next mark, study time is over, whether you're ready or not. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine a medieval student explaining to his teacher, "I couldn't finish the assignment. The candle ran out." You almost wish you could use that excuse today. The flame dances, casting moving shadows across the shelves. The saints and scholars painted in manuscript illuminations seem to shift, nodding along as you read their words. The candle clock doesn't just measure your time. It seems to bless your study, making each moment glow a little brighter before fading away. Gentle joke number 2. You picture a novice secretly carving doodles into the wooden desk, only to blame it on a wandering flame when caught. Brother, the candle made me do it. A defense as wobbly as wax itself. As you turn another page, the candle dips lower, dripping gently into the metal dish. You feel the hours dissolving, your own thoughts slowing with a flicker. Knowledge, devotion, and time all blur together in the golden haze of flame. And soon, you realize the library itself is breathing with you, inhaling with every spark, exhaling with every drop, as though wisdom itself is carried on the wax. You wander now into a shadowy corridor, where the smell of singed fabric lingers faintly, a reminder of the darker side of candles. The monks loved their waxen clocks, yes, but they also feared them. Fire was both blessing and danger, and in a monastery filled with wood, parchment, and woolen robes, a single toppled candle could undo centuries of devotion in minutes. Here's your grounded historical fact. Medieval records describe multiple fires in monasteries and libraries caused by candles. Though candle clocks were ingenious, they carried the same risks as ordinary flames: melting wax spilling, flames tipping, sparks catching on parchment or timber beams. Some abbeys lost entire collections of manuscripts to accidental blazes. And the quirky tidbit? Some monks were so anxious about fire that they devised little sand trays beneath candle clocks to catch sparks and drips. Others stationed novices as fire watchers, their entire duty being to sit near the flame with a jug of water ready. Imagine trying to stay awake all night, just waiting for wax to misbehave. Historians still argue whether candle clocks were more dangerous than ordinary lamps, or the fear of fire simply magnified their reputation. Did the mechanisms with falling pins and weights increase the risk, or was that just an exaggerated concern noted by later chroniclers? No consensus, just smudged manuscripts and rebuilt cloisters. You picture yourself as one of those novices, sitting cross-legged beside a burning candle, fighting sleep with heavy eyelids. Every crackle makes you tense. Every drip of wax a potential disaster. It's not glamorous work. It's anxious, endless waiting. But in a place where books are treasures, vigilance feels holy. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine being reassigned after dozing off. Congratulations, brother. You're no longer fire watcher. You're now latrine watcher. Some promotions aren't worth celebrating. The danger wasn't always catastrophic, though. Sometimes it was almost comical. A monk's sleeve catching fire during midnight prayers, quickly smothered in a flurry of embarrassed slaps. A candle tipping and scorching a wooden bench, leaving a blackened reminder of wax's temper. Life with flame was always life on edge, even in devotion. Gentle joke number 2. You think of monks muttering, "Lord, deliver us from temptation and from Brother Peter's clumsy elbows." Perhaps the most practical prayer of all. And yet, the risk didn't deter them. They kept burning candles, kept trusting flames, because time itself depended on them. Each vigil was worth a gamble, each prayer worth a chance. And so, in the quiet corridors where sin smells linger, you sense the paradox. Danger and devotion melted into the same flickering glow. You step outside for a moment, into the cool night air of the cloister courtyard. The sky is spread wide with stars, bright enough to trace faint constellations, while the moon casts its pale glow over the stone arches. You realize that monks didn't rely on candle clocks alone. They lived in a universe where time could also be read in the heavens, where wax and starlight often worked hand in hand. Here's your steady historical fact. Monasteries often paired candle clocks with other timekeeping methods, including sundials during the day and observation of stars or moon phases at night. Some abbeys even had rudimentary astrolabes to calculate prayer hours. The candle clock filled the gaps when celestial markers were hidden or inconvenient. And here's the quirky tidbit. In some records, candles were reportedly lit alongside sundials in the same cloister gardens, a curious pairing of fire and shadow. It was as if monks trusted both heaven and earth, light above and flame below, to keep their days aligned. You imagine a brother muttering, "If the candle disagrees with the stars, perhaps we should just ask God directly." Historians still argue whether astronomy played a major role in everyday monastic life or remained the domain of a few scholarly brothers. Did every monk glance at the stars when unsure of the hour, or was it a rare privilege for those with education and instruments? The answer flickers uncertainly, much like a flame in a draft. You stand in the courtyard, head tilted back, watching Orion rise above the cloister roof. The candle you carry glows weakly in comparison, but together they make sense. Celestial and earthly timekeepers, balancing one another in quiet cooperation. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine a monk debating. The candle says it's matins, but the stars say otherwise. His brother shrugs. Flip a coin, then. Either way will be chanting. The combination of flame and sky shaped their worldview. Ours weren't just practical divisions. They were stitched into a cosmic fabric. Each psalm, each vigil, wasn't only timed by wax marks, but also aligned with celestial order. To follow the candle clock was, in a sense, to mirror the universe itself. Gentle joke number 2. You picture a novice stuck on cloudy nights, panicking. The stars are gone. The candle is crooked. We're doomed. His elder sighs. Calm yourself, brother. Just keep chanting until dawn. God will sort it out. You exhale, letting the cool air fill your lungs as the candle sputters softly. In this marriage of wax and stars, you feel time expand, stretch, and settle again. Hours are no longer numbers. They are whispers of flame and constellations, guiding the monastery gently through the long, dark night. You follow the monks beyond the walls, onto the narrow paths that wind through fields and villages. Not every prayer is sung within stone halls. Sometimes the brothers travel, carrying their waxen clocks with them. Pilgrims, too, you imagine, tuck small candles into their packs, a portable measure of the hours when bells are too far away to hear. Here's your grounded historical fact. Candle clocks weren't confined to monasteries. Pilgrims and travelers sometimes used portable versions, lighting them in inns or roadside chapels to mark prayer intervals or simply keep track of watches through the night. Wax became a universal companion, glowing in both cloister silence and bustling taverns. Now for the quirky tidbit. There are accounts of innkeepers timing lodging fees by burning candles. One rate until the wax reached a certain point, another after burned lower. Imagine paying rent by the inch of flame. You can picture weary travelers groaning, "Please, sir, move the candle away from that draft. It's costing me a fortune." Historians still argue whether these portable candle clocks were common or rare curiosities. Were they practical tools carried on pilgrim roads, or luxuries only wealthier travelers could afford? The evidence is thin, flickering like a flame that might have gone out centuries ago. You picture yourself sitting in a dim inn along a muddy road. Pilgrims crowd the benches, their cloaks damp from rain, their sandals caked in dirt. A single candle clock burns on the counter, watched closely by the innkeeper. Each drip of wax isn't just time. It's money, devotion, and patience all melting into the same puddle. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine today's hotels swapping clocks for candles. Checkout is when the wax runs out. You'd never sleep easy. The candle's portability gave it a strange versatility. In monasteries, it was sacred. In villages, practical. On the road, comforting. Whether you were a monk on pilgrimage or a traveler guarding against thieves, the candle clock gave structure to the restless dark. Gentle joke number 2. You imagine 2 monks on the road. One carrying the candle, the other the sand timer. They bicker constantly. Your wax is running fast. Your sand is damp. Timekeeping as comedy, medieval edition. As the flame burns lower, you feel the comfort of its glow. Out here, beyond cloister walls, the candle is no longer just an instrument of order. It's a fragile beacon against the uncertainty of travel, a little island of time in a wide, wandering night. You drift now into stories carried from the East, where time was measured not by wax but by smoke and fragrance. In China, incense clocks burned steadily through coils or sticks, each section releasing a different scent to mark the passage of hours. In Japan, ropes of slow-burning incense smoldered across measured lengths, serving the same purpose as a monk's candle clock. Here's your grounded historical fact. Incense clocks were widely used in East Asia for centuries, especially in temples and wealthy households. They provided both timekeeping and atmosphere, their fragrant smoke winding through halls as predictably as candle wax in Europe. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some incense clocks were so elaborate they embedded tiny metal balls that dropped onto gongs as the incense burned through threads. Imagine monks in Kyoto listening for faint tinks of falling beads, just as European brothers waited for candle pins to clink into trays. Different continents, same sleepy startle. Historians still argue whether there was any direct influence between incense clocks in the East and candle clocks in the West. Did the ideas travel along trade routes like the Silk Road, or did both cultures invent their fiery timepieces independently? The evidence remains uncertain, though the parallels are hard to ignore. You picture yourself in a Kyoto temple, the air thick with sandalwood smoke, shadows swaying with lanterns. The smell is soothing, the rhythm of time carried not by dripping wax, but by curling smoke drifting toward the ceiling. Then you picture yourself back in a European cloister, coughing gently at the smell of rancid tallow. Suddenly, incense feels like the more pleasant option. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine a medieval monk sniffing incense for the first time. "Brother, their clocks smell better than our dinners." He wouldn't be wrong. The beauty of these parallels is striking. Across continents, people face the same problem: how to measure the invisible flow of hours when the sun was gone. And across continents, they reach for fire, for burning, for transformation, whether wax melting or incense smoldering. Gentle joke number 2. You imagine a cultural exchange. European monks gifting a candle clock to Chinese scholars, who politely smile while thinking, "This thing stinks." Meanwhile, Incense clocks sent westward leave monks daydreaming about curry instead of psalms. Mid-time prayers, but pleasantly scented. You let the smoke and wax mingle in your mind. Two traditions glowing together across distance and time. Whether it was a candle in France or incense in Chang'an, the message was the same. To tame the night, you need something that burns. You walk back into the cloister hallway, where the hush of night is broken only by two sounds. The faint drip of wax and the deep toll of bells. The contrast is striking. One is small, intimate, easy to miss unless you lean close. The other is grand, booming across valleys, shaking the air. Together, they form the twin heartbeats of the monastery, silence and sound. Here's your grounded historical fact. Monasteries relied on both bells and candle clocks. Bells signaled the major turning points of the day. Lauds at dawn, vespers at dusk, while candles divided the in-between, the smaller stretches that bells didn't always cover. One was communal, public, the other personal, quiet. And the quirky tidbit? Some records suggest that monks joked about lazy bells, because sometimes a candle burned past its mark before anyone rang them. You can imagine one sleepy brother nudging another. Brother, the wax says it's sexed already. Would you kindly get to the belfry? Historians still argue whether candles or bells held greater authority. Did the flame's silent schedule command obedience, or was the booming bell the final word? Some suggest bells dominated, with candles as backups. Others insist that wax ruled the cloister's inner rhythm. No agreement, only echoes. You picture yourself sitting in the hall, hearing a faint plink as a pin drops from a candle, followed by a long pause, and then, at last, the heavy clang of a bell tower far above. The two rhythms overlap clumsily, like musicians improvising in different keys. Somehow, though, it still works. Gentle joke number one. Imagine a monk shouting from the belfry, "The candle was wrong again," and another retorting, "Perhaps you just slept to the last clink." Medieval banter at its finest. The drip of wax has a different power. It doesn't demand attention. It invites it. Where the bell startles, the candle soothes. The monastery needed both. Discipline from above, meditation from below. One shakes the valley awake. The other lets a brother drift into thought without losing his place in time. Gentle joke number two. You imagine novices caught between signals. Bell ringing for terce while the candle says it's still prime. They stand frozen, bowls of porridge in hand, waiting for someone braver to decide. Breakfast or prayer. The eternal dilemma. As you sit listening, you realize how the two sounds shape the rhythm of monastic life. One was thunder, the other whisper, together. They stitch time into something monks could inhabit without losing themselves in endless night. And you, caught in the quiet between clinks and clangs, begin to drift too, lulled by the strange duet of wax and bronze. You move deeper into the monastery's memory, where stories are told in hushed tones. Not everything about candle clocks was dull practicality. Some tales made them sound nearly magical, almost legendary. Around the fire, monks whispered candles that seemed to know dawn better than roosters, or wax that burned with supernatural precision. Here's your grounded historical fact. Written accounts do exist of candle clocks praised for their remarkable consistency, burning through the night with almost uncanny steadiness. Some abbots boasted their wax kept better time than any bell ringer. Now for the quirky tidbit. A popular tale described a candle that always burned down exactly as the first rooster crowed. The monks joked it was trained, a secret rival to the barnyard bird. Imagine the poor rooster feeling outshone by a stick of wax. Humiliating. Historians still argue whether these accurate candles were truly exceptional examples or just exaggerations in storytelling. Did monks really craft superior wax mixtures, or did legend simply polish ordinary experiences into marvels? The debate flickers on, much like the flame itself. You picture yourself in the dormitory, listening to these stories as the brothers chuckle softly. One candle supposedly predicted the exact hour of a bishop's arrival. Another burned unevenly, but always sputtered out right as the bell struck. A mix of truth, luck, and embellishment turned wax into wonder. Gentle joke number one. Imagine branding them. Guaranteed rooster sync candles, only at your local abbey. Limited stock. you'd sell out before matins. The legends gave monks a playful edge to their otherwise rigid lives. Timekeeping wasn't only discipline. It was also a source of small amazements. When a candle burned in rhythm with nature or circumstance, they saw not coincidence but divine alignment, proof that God was in the details of wax. Gentle joke number 2. Picture the rooster sulking in the corner. What's the point of crowing if a candle already did my job? Monks might have offered him extra grain out of pity. As the tales settle in your mind, you realize how much humans long for reliability, for signs that time and life move in harmony. Candle clocks, whether accurate or not, fed that longing. They weren't just tools. They became characters in the monastic drama, keepers of secrets, quiet companions of prayer. And you, half drowsing as the monk's laughter fades, feel the pull of that same gentle magic. The belief that even a humble flame can sync perfectly with the rhythm of the world. You sense the story shifting toward an ending of sorts, though not for the monks, only for their beloved waxen clocks. As you walk through the monastery halls in your imagination, you begin to notice other devices creeping into the rhythm of life. The drip of water in jars, the tick of early gears. Candle clocks, once indispensable, are slowly outshined by new ways of marking the hours. Here's your grounded historical fact. By the late Middle Ages, water clocks, and especially mechanical tower clocks, began replacing candle clocks across Europe. These innovations were more precise, less vulnerable to drafts, and didn't melt into puddles that had to be scraped from floors. The world was learning to measure time with iron and stone instead of wax. And here's the quirky tidbit. In some towns, mechanical clocks were installed on church towers not only to tell the hour but to assert civic pride. A giant gear-driven clock face was a symbol of wealth and power. Imagine monks quietly frowning, realizing their humble candles now looked rather outdated next to a gleaming tower bell mechanism. Historians still argue whether candle clocks lingered mainly as ceremonial symbols once mechanical clocks took over. Were they phased out quickly, or did small abbeys cling to them for centuries, reluctant to abandon the familiar flame? Surviving records suggest both. Some monasteries embraced the new, others stubbornly clung to the old wax. You picture yourself in the cloister yard as a new tower clock is unveiled. Townsfolk cheer, gears clank, bells toll. Yet in the quiet corner of the monastery, a single candle still burns, marking prayers and flickers and drips. Two worlds overlap, the mechanical and the waxen, the precise and the poetic. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine a monk grumbling, "These new machines never smell like honey." You can almost hear the nostalgia dripping like wax. The transition wasn't just technological, it was cultural. Mechanical clocks marked a shift toward measured, regimented, civic time. Candle clocks belonged to an older world where time was intimate, spiritual, and fragrant. Gentle joke number 2. Picture a novice pointing at the new tower clock and whispering, "Father, does it run on wax too?" The abbot sighs deeply. "No, brother, it runs on gears and pride." As the gears turn louder in your imagination, the candle flickers more softly, almost shy. Yet you realize the flame isn't gone. It lingers in language, memory, ritual. Even as new inventions push forward, the candles still hold a corner of time, glowing gently in the shadows, refusing to vanish entirely. You step into a grand hall, where tapestries hang heavy and the air smells faintly of roasted meats. This isn't a monastery anymore, it's a royal court. Yet, even here, the humble candle clock makes an appearance, borrowed from monastic life, and given a more glamorous role. Kings, it turns out, needed to measure time too, especially for feasts and rituals that seem to stretch endlessly. Here's your grounded historical fact. Candle clocks weren't confined to monasteries. Some courts adopted them for practical and ceremonial purposes, especially during banquets where timing entertainment, toasts, or prayers mattered. They served as subtle regulators in places where no one wanted to carry a sundial indoors. And here's the quirky tidbit. In some stories, candles were used to measure not just time but indulgence. Guests were told they could eat or drink until a candle burned down to a mark. Imagine nobles stuffing their cheeks with roasted pheasant, all the while eyeing shrinking wax like contestants in a medieval game show. Historians still argue whether these uses at court were common practice or more anecdotal curiosities. Were candle clocks genuinely employed at banquets, or were they symbolic gestures meant to show control and order in royal households? The evidence is tantalizing but thin, leaving scholars to bicker across centuries. You picture yourself seated at a long oak table, goblet in hand. Musicians play softly, servants move quietly, and a tall candle clock sits by the king's elbow. As the wax lowers, the feast shifts, music swells, then quiets, prayers rise and fall. Even in a world of extravagance, wax dictates the pace. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine a glutton whispering, "Quick, brother, tilt the candle so we get more time with the roast goose." A dangerous move in front of watchful lords. The presence of candle clocks in court shows how the device slipped between worlds. Sacred and secular, cloister and castle. Timekeeping wasn't just about prayer. It was about control, structure, and spectacle. Gentle joke number 2. You imagine a king bragging to foreign guests. "Here we measure our banquets by holy flame." Meanwhile, the guests just wonder when dessert will arrive. As you lean back in your imaginary chair, the candle burns lower, gilding goblets and glittering jewels with soft light. You realize how wax bound all classes together. Monks in silence, nobles in splendor, both watching flames dissolve into hours. The candle clock may have been humble, but its reach extended from chapel to throne, quietly governing moments both holy and worldly. You find yourself in another workshop, though this one is stranger than the candle-dipping rooms you've seen before. On a rough wooden table lie half-finished candles, their surfaces not smooth but gritty, laced with odd powders and flecks. The monks here were not content with plain wax. They experimented, mixing in curious ingredients to alter how time itself was measured. Here's your grounded historical fact. Some account mention additives like salt, metal filings, or herbs being mixed into wax. The idea was to adjust burn rates, steady the flame, or create markers as the candle melted. In certain cases, gunpowder was even added in tiny amounts to create a sudden spark at a specific time. And here's your quirky tidbit. One story tells of a candle that popped loudly midway through a vigil, startling half the choir. Whether by accident or design, it proved an effective alarm. Imagine Brother Thomas nearly dropping his psalter as sparks leapt from the altar. Historians still argue whether these modified candles were genuine tools, or more like experiments recorded for curiosity's sake. Were additives widespread, or were they novelties tried by a handful of inventive monks? The evidence smolders faintly, much like the remains of a gunpowder-laced wick. You picture yourself watching a brother carefully sprinkle crushed herbs into melted wax, muttering that rosemary will steady the flame. Another insists that a pinch of salt will make it burn slower. A third, more mischievous, suggests a dab of gunpowder for excitement. You can almost hear the abbot's weary sigh when the candle explodes at Compline. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine marketing these concoctions today. Try our new medieval smart candles. Scented, timed, and occasionally explosive. Not quite a bestseller. The experiments reflect the truth. Monks were not only pious but inventive. They tinkered because they wanted time to be more predictable, even if that meant turning wax into something unpredictable. A paradox wrapped in flame. Gentle joke number 2. You picture a novice nervously explaining scorch marks on the chapel wall. It wasn't me, Father. It was a rosemary candle. Not exactly a confession to inspire forgiveness. As the air fills with the smell of herbs, smoke, and singed cloth, you realize these experiments were more than accidents. They were part of the long human tradition of fiddling with nature, trying to bend it toward order. And even if the candles occasionally hissed, popped, or sputtered out too soon, each attempt was a step toward mastering the fragile art of measuring time with fire. You step into a corner of the dormitory where the mood is unexpectedly light. Monks may have lived lives of silence and prayer. But even here, humor found its way through. Candle clocks, those solemn keepers of time, often became but quiet jokes, whispered when the abbot's back was turned. Here's your grounded historical fact. Despite the discipline of monastic life, records and marginal notes and manuscripts reveal that monks did joke, poke fun at routines, and sometimes even lampoon the very tools that ruled their days. The candle clock, so central to their schedule, inevitably became part of that humor. Now for the quirky tidbit. One tale describes a monk who swore that candles burned faster after hearty meals, blaming greedy flames for rushing through prayer intervals. Whether he was joking or sincerely hungry, the story circulated, becoming a kind of running gag in his abbey. Historians still argue whether such humor was widespread or rare. Was it safe for monks to laugh openly about the strict rules that govern them, or did they sneak these jokes only into private conversations and manuscript doodles? The surviving scraps of evidence are playful but sparse. You picture yourself in that dormitory, hearing low whispers as two brothers chuckle over their waxen overseer. One mutters, "If only we could blow out the candle. Perhaps matins would never arrive." The other smirks, "Careful, God might relight it himself." You suppress a laugh, almost feeling guilty for joining in. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine monks today running a medieval comedy sketch. When your candle clock runs too fast, and suddenly it's vespers before lunch. Cue groans and chuckles. Their humor was never loud, never irreverent enough to disrupt devotion. Instead, it was a gentle relief, a way to admit their humanity in a life designed to push them closer to sainthood. A flicker of laughter, like a flicker of flame, softened the austerity. Gentle joke number 2. You think of a novice accidentally leaning too close, his sleeve catching fire, and his brothers later teasing him. "Burning with holy zeal, are you?" That joke probably lasted longer than the sleeve. As you let the whispers fade, you realize humor was part of survival. Candle clocks may have measured discipline, but jokes measured endurance. Without them, life in the cloister might have been unbearable. With them, even the relentless drip of wax became something to smile about. And so, in flickers of laughter, just as in flickers of flame, time passed a little more gently. You wander into a nearly empty chapel, its walls cool with centuries of silence. Only one candle burns on the altar, tall and solemn, its wax descending slowly. You realize you are watching not just light, but the symbolic end of an era. This isn't any candle. It is the last of its kind, a candle clock still doing its quiet duty, while newer methods of timekeeping hum outside monastery walls. Here's your grounded historical fact. By the late medieval period, mechanical clocks, weight-driven, gear-heavy, often mounted in church towers, became the dominant way of marking hours. Candle clocks, once essential, slipped into obscurity, remembered more in chronicles than in daily use. Now for the quirky tidbit. A few anecdotes tell of stubborn abbots who insisted on keeping candle clocks long after mechanical bells were installed. They argued that the flame was holier, closer to God, less worldly than iron gears. Imagine their faces when younger monks teased, "Father, the gears don't drip on our psalters." Historians still argue whether candle clocks truly vanished quickly or lingered in quiet corners. Some evidence suggests smaller houses, unable to afford elaborate clocks, used candles well into the Renaissance. Others insist they were abandoned as soon as better methods spread. The truth, like wax, likely melted differently in each place. You picture yourself sitting alone, watching that final flame. The candle dips lower, shadows climb higher. Once, this glow commanded meals, prayers, and vigils. Now, it feels almost ceremonial, like a goodbye. The monks around you chant softly, perhaps more out of nostalgia than necessity. Gentle joke number 1. You imagine a stubborn monk refusing the new bell tower entirely. Gears are the devil's business. Wax only. As the rest of the abbey rolls its eyes. The symbolism weighs heavy. As the candle shrinks, it feels like the passing of a whole worldview. Time measured not in ticks, but in drips. Not in cold precision, but in warm imperfection. A rhythm tied to fire, to smell, to shadow. Gentle joke number 2. You picture the last novice assigned to watch it muttering, "Great, I'm in charge of history's final wax meltdown." Not the legacy he expected. As the flame trembles, nearly gone, you sense the bittersweet beauty of its final duty. The last candle clock may sputter out, but in that moment, it has still measured time. Yours, theirs, ours. It doesn't vanish. It lingers, glowing in memory. You step forward in time, centuries ahead, into a quiet museum gallery. The stone walls are replaced by white plaster. The monks replaced by tourists whispering softly as they shuffle past glass cases. There, under carefully positioned lights, stands a reproduction of a candle clock, tall and pale, its surface etched with neat black lines. You realize that though the monks are gone, the flame hasn't entirely disappeared. It lives on in reenactments, experiments, and curious imaginations. Here's your grounded historical fact. Modern historians and hobbyists have tried to reconstruct candle clocks using beeswax and tallow, testing how evenly they burn and whether they could truly measure hours. The results are mixed, sometimes impressively steady, other times laughably uneven. Now for quirky tidbit. One reenactment group discovered that a drafty window ruined their carefully measured candles, speeding up time on one side while slowing it on the other. Their conclusion? The monks must have known frustration as well as devotion. It's strangely comforting to think 1,000 years ago someone muttered the same annoyed sigh at a crooked flame. Historians still argue whether these modern tests prove anything. Can a 21st century candle really mimic one made with medieval tools, bees, and hands? Or are we only guessing at shadows, trying to resurrect rhythms we can never fully grasp? The scholarly debates go on, fueled by wax drips and patient experiments. You imagine yourself walking through this museum, leaning closer to see wax hardened at each notch. A plaque explains how monks once timed prayers with these fragile devices. Nearby, a video screen shows a modern monk lighting one in a silent abbey. Try and practice again. The flame trembles just as it always has, bridging centuries with its soft glow. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine a modern reenactor announcing, "My candle clock says it's 3 a.m., time for chanting." His neighbors, unimpressed, call the cops. The charm of these reenactments is not precision but connection. By watching wax burn, you glimpse what it was like to surrender time to fire, to let life be measured by something so simple and fragile. Gentle joke number 2. You picture a curator nervously explaining scorch marks on a display case. Authentic. I swear, we were just testing realism. Not quite in the budget report. As you leave the gallery, you realize the flame hasn't died at all. It burns now in memory, in curiosity, in the quiet joy of people still willing to watch wax melt and pretend, for a moment, that time is slower, gentler, measured not in ticks but in flickers. You wander into a nearly empty chapel, its walls cool with centuries of silence. Only one candle burns on the altar, tall and solemn, its wax descending slowly. You realize you are watching not just light, but the symbolic end of an era. This isn't any candle. It is the last of its kind, a candle clock still doing its quiet duty, while newer methods of timekeeping hum outside monastery walls. Here's your grounded historical fact. By the late medieval period, mechanical clocks, weight-driven, gear-heavy, often mounted in church towers, became the dominant way of marking hours. Candle clocks, once essential, slipped into obscurity, remembered more in chronicles than in daily use. Now for the quirky tidbit. A few anecdotes tell of stubborn abbots who insisted on keeping candle clocks long after mechanical bells were installed. They argued that the flame was holier, closer to God, less worldly than iron gears. Imagine their faces when younger monks teased, "Father, the gears don't drip on our psalters." Historians still argue whether candle clocks truly vanished quickly or lingered in quiet corners. Some evidence suggests smaller houses, unable to afford elaborate clocks, used candles well into the Renaissance. Others insist they were abandoned as soon as better methods spread. The truth, like wax, likely melted differently in each place. You picture yourself sitting alone, watching that final flame. The candle dips lower, shadows climb higher. Once, this glow commanded meals, prayers, and vigils. Now, it feels almost ceremonial, like a goodbye. The monks around you chant softly, perhaps more out of nostalgia than necessity. Gentle joke number 1. You imagine a stubborn monk refusing the new bell tower entirely. Gears are the devil's business. Wax only. As the rest of the abbey rolls its eyes, the symbolism weighs heavy. As the candle shrinks, it feels like the passing of a whole worldview, time measured not in ticks but in drips, not in cold precision but in warm imperfection. A rhythm tied to fire, to smell, to shadow, Gentle joke number 2. You picture the last novice assigned to watch it muttering, "Great, I'm in charge of history's final wax meltdown." Not the legacy he expected. As the flame trembles, nearly gone, you sense the bittersweet beauty of its final duty. The last candle clock may sputter out, but in that moment, it has still measured time. Yours, theirs, ours. It doesn't vanish. It lingers, glowing in memory. You step forward in time, centuries ahead, into a quiet museum gallery. The stone walls are replaced by white plaster. The monks replaced by tourists whispering softly as they shuffle past glass cases. There, under carefully positioned lights, stands a reproduction of a candle clock, tall and pale, its surface etched with neat black lines. You realize that though the monks are gone, the flame hasn't entirely disappeared. It lives on in reenactments, experiments, and curious imaginations. Here's your grounded historical fact. Modern historians and hobbyists have tried to reconstruct candle clocks using beeswax and tallow, testing how evenly they burn and whether they could truly measure hours. The results are mixed, sometimes impressively steady, other times laughably uneven. Now for quirky tidbit. One reenactment group discovered that a drafty window ruined their carefully measured candles, speeding up time on one side while slowing it on the other. Their conclusion? The monks must have known frustration as well as devotion. It's strangely comforting to think 1,000 years ago someone muttered the same annoyed sigh at a crooked flame. Historians still argue whether these modern tests prove anything. Can a 21st century candle really mimic one made with medieval tools, bees, and hands? Or are we only guessing at shadows, trying to resurrect rhythms we can never fully grasp? The scholarly debates go on, fueled by wax drips and patient experiments. You imagine yourself walking through this museum, leaning closer to see wax hardened at each notch. A plaque explains how monks once timed prayers with these fragile devices. Nearby, a video screen shows a modern monk lighting one in a silent abbey. Try and practice again. The flame trembles just as it always has, bridging centuries with its soft glow. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine a modern reenactor announcing, "My candle clock says it's 3 a.m., time for chanting." His neighbors, unimpressed, call the cops. The charm of these reenactments is not precision but connection. By watching wax burn, you glimpse what it was like to surrender time to fire, to let life be measured by something so simple and fragile. Gentle joke number 2. You picture a curator nervously explaining scorch marks on a display case. Authentic. I swear, we were just testing realism. Not quite in the budget report. As you leave the gallery, you realize the flame hasn't died at all. It burns now in memory, in curiosity, in the quiet joy of people still willing to watch wax melt and pretend, for a moment, that time is slower, gentler, measured not in ticks but in flickers. You step into the flow of language itself, where old habits survive, not in wax but in words. Even though candle clocks have long since melted into history, their memory lingers in the phrases people still use. Language carries the echo of dripping wax, turning once practical devices into poetic expressions. Here's your grounded historical fact. The phrase burning the candle at both ends has medieval roots, originally mocking the wasteful or impractical use of candles, an expensive resource at the time. Over centuries, it transformed into a metaphor for exhausting yourself, stretching time and energy too thin. Now for the quirky tidbit. In some medieval plays and satirical texts, candles were personified, scolded for melting too quickly, or praised for burning steadily. The jokes worked because everyone understood how vital and how costly candles were. When a character complained about wax, the audience chuckled knowingly, seeing both light and money drip away. Historians still argue whether these linguistic echoes come directly from candle clocks or from broader candle culture. Was a metaphor of time melting, inspired by clock candles, or simply by the universal sight of wax vanishing? The debate lingers in etymological footnotes, flickering like a half-forgotten flame. You imagine yourself hearing a monk mutter centuries ago, "We've burned the candle at both ends again," his brothers chuckling softly at the pun. Now, the same phrase rolls off modern tongues, divorced from wax yet still alive. The past seeps into everyday speech like melted wax creeping into cracks. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine explaining to a medieval brother that people today use burnout as a metaphor. He frowns, gestures to his candle, and says, "We've been burning out for centuries." Language preserves what objects cannot. Even though no candle clocks remain in common use, their rhythm still beats quietly in idioms, proverbs, and metaphors. Every time someone sighs about time slipping away, they unknowingly echo monks watching wax drip into trays. Gentle joke number 2. Picture a medieval abbot overhearing a modern motivational speaker shouting, "Seize the day." He'd nod and mutter, "Yes, brother. And don't forget to seize the beeswax." As you sit with the thought, you realize that wax, once burned to smoke, lingers only as scent in memory. And words are much the same. Soft flames carried forward, flickering in mouths long after the original candles have gone dark. Language itself has become the last candle clock, quietly measuring the endurance of human imagination. You wander into a nearly empty chapel, its walls cool with centuries of silence. Only one candle burns on the altar, tall and solemn, its wax descending slowly. You realize you are watching not just light, but the symbolic end of an era. This isn't any candle. It is the last of its kind, a candle clock still doing its quiet duty, while newer methods of timekeeping hum outside monastery walls. Here's your grounded historical fact. By the late medieval period, mechanical clocks, weight-driven, gear-heavy, often mounted in church towers, became the dominant way of marking hours. Candle clocks, once essential, slipped into obscurity, remembered more in chronicles than in daily use. Now for the quirky tidbit. A few anecdotes tell of stubborn abbots who insisted on keeping candle clocks long after mechanical bells were installed. They argued that the flame was holier, closer to God, less worldly than iron gears. Imagine their faces when younger monks teased, "Father, the gears don't drip on our psalters." Historians still argue whether candle clocks truly vanished quickly or lingered in quiet corners. Some evidence suggests smaller houses, unable to afford elaborate clocks, used candles well into the Renaissance. Others insist they were abandoned as soon as better methods spread. The truth, like wax, likely melted differently in each place. You picture yourself sitting alone, watching that final flame. The candle dips lower, shadows climb higher. Once, this glow commanded meals, prayers, and vigils. Now, it feels almost ceremonial, like a goodbye. The monks around you chant softly, perhaps more out of nostalgia than necessity. Gentle joke number 1. You imagine a stubborn monk refusing the new bell tower entirely. Gears are the devil's business. Wax only. As the rest of the abbey rolls its eyes, the symbolism weighs heavy. As the candle shrinks, it feels like the passing of a whole worldview, time measured not in ticks but in drips, not in cold precision but in warm imperfection. A rhythm tied to fire, to smell, to shadow. Gentle joke number 2. You picture the last novice assigned to watch it muttering, "Great, I'm in charge of history's final wax meltdown." Not the legacy he expected. As the flame trembles, nearly gone, you sense the bittersweet beauty of its final duty. The last candle clock may sputter out, but in that moment, it has still measured time. Yours, theirs, ours. It doesn't vanish. It lingers, glowing in memory. You step forward in time, centuries ahead, into a quiet museum gallery. The stone walls are replaced by white plaster. The monks replaced by tourists whispering softly as they shuffle past glass cases. There, under carefully positioned lights, stands a reproduction of a candle clock, tall and pale, its surface etched with neat black lines. You realize that though the monks are gone, the flame hasn't entirely disappeared. It lives on in reenactments, experiments, and curious imaginations. Here's your grounded historical fact. Modern historians and hobbyists have tried to reconstruct candle clocks using beeswax and tallow, testing how evenly they burn and whether they could truly measure hours. The results are mixed, sometimes impressively steady, other times laughably uneven. Now for quirky tidbit. One reenactment group discovered that a drafty window ruined their carefully measured candles, speeding up time on one side while slowing it on the other. Their conclusion? The monks must have known frustration as well as devotion. It's strangely comforting to think 1,000 years ago someone muttered the same annoyed sigh at a crooked flame. Historians still argue whether these modern tests prove anything. Can a 21st century candle really mimic one made with medieval tools, bees, and hands? Or are we only guessing at shadows, trying to resurrect rhythms we can never fully grasp? The scholarly debates go on, fueled by wax drips and patient experiments. You imagine yourself walking through this museum, leaning closer to see wax hardened at each notch. A plaque explains how monks once timed prayers with these fragile devices. Nearby, a video screen shows a modern monk lighting one in a silent abbey. Try and practice again. The flame trembles just as it always has, bridging centuries with its soft glow. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine a modern reenactor announcing, "My candle clock says it's 3 a.m., time for chanting." His neighbors, unimpressed, call the cops. The charm of these reenactments is not precision but connection. By watching wax burn, you glimpse what it was like to surrender time to fire, to let life be measured by something so simple and fragile. Gentle joke number 2. You picture a curator nervously explaining scorch marks on the display case. Authentic. I swear, we were just testing realism. Not quite in the budget report. As you leave the gallery, you realize the flame hasn't died at all. It burns now in memory, in curiosity, in the quiet joy of people still willing to watch wax melt and pretend, for a moment, that time is slower, gentler, measured not in ticks but in flickers. You find yourself back in the cloister one last time, the stones cool beneath your feet, the halls echoing faintly with the distant murmur of chants. A single candle clock burns in the corner, its wax low, its flame trembling. You realize this is not just another scene. It feels like a farewell, the closing of a long, flickering journey. Here's your grounded historical fact. While candle clocks eventually faded from practical use, they left behind a legacy of ingenuity. They bridged the gap between natural cycles and human needs, turning something as simple as wax and fire into a reliable rhythm of devotion, work, and rest. And here's the quirky tidbit. Centuries later, collectors and antiquarians occasionally stumbled upon marked candles in archives and storerooms, puzzling over their strange notches. To them, it seemed quaint, until they realized these scratches once commanded the hours of entire communities. A humble stick of wax had ruled lives with the quiet authority of fire. Historians still argue whether to treat candle clocks as serious instruments of time or as symbols of transitional age, half ritual, half technology. Were they true clocks or simply aids of memory and prayer? The debate continues, glowing softly in academic circles. Much as a flame still glows before you now. You imagine yourself sitting with the monks for one final vigil. The flame dips lower, casting long, trembling shadows along the arches. Each drip of wax is a heartbeat, each flicker a reminder that hours, like candles, cannot last forever. Yet in their passing, they give warmth, order, and meaning. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine a monk quipping, "We are all just candle clocks," slowly dripping into history. You chuckle because it's true, and also oddly comforting. Gentle joke number 2. You picture the novice assigned guard this last flame muttering, "If it goes out on my watch, I'm doomed to latrine duty for eternity." His worry lightens the solemnity, reminding you that even endings carry laughter. The flame sputters once, twice, then steadies. It isn't gone yet. It still has a little more to give. And in that stubborn glow, you see not just monks, not just wax, but the entire human impulse to measure, to order, to make sense of life's flow. A tiny flame against the darkness, speaking softly. Your time matters, because you are here to spend it. You find yourself back in the cloister one last time, the stones cool beneath your feet, the halls echoing faintly with the distant murmur of chants. A single candle clock burns in the corner, its wax low, its flame trembling. You realize this is not just another scene. It feels like a farewell, the closing of a long, flickering journey. Here's your grounded historical fact. While candle clocks eventually faded from practical use, they left behind a legacy of ingenuity. They bridged the gap between natural cycles and human needs, turning something as simple as wax and fire into a reliable rhythm of devotion, work, and rest. And here's the quirky tidbit. Centuries later, collectors and antiquarians occasionally stumbled upon marked candles in archives and storerooms, puzzling over their strange notches. To them, it seemed quaint, until they realized these scratches once commanded the hours of entire communities. A humble stick of wax had ruled lives with the quiet authority of fire. Historians still argue whether to treat candle clocks as serious instruments of time or as symbols of transitional age, half ritual, half technology. Were they true clocks, or simply aids of memory and prayer? The debate continues, glowing softly in academic circles. Much as a flame still glows before you now, you imagine yourself sitting with the monks for one final vigil. The flame dips lower, casting long, trembling shadows along the arches. Each drip of wax is a heartbeat, each flicker a reminder that hours, like candles, cannot last forever. Yet in their passing, they give warmth, order, and meaning. Gentle joke number 1. Imagine a monk quipping, "We are all just candle clocks," slowly dripping into history. You chuckle because it's true, and also oddly comforting. Gentle joke number 2. You picture the novice assigned guard this last flame muttering, "If it goes out on my watch, I'm doomed to latrine duty for eternity." His worry lightens the solemnity, reminding you that even endings carry laughter. The flame sputters once, twice, then steadies. It isn't gone yet. It still has a little more to give. And in that stubborn glow, you see not just monks, not just wax, but the entire human impulse to measure, to order, to make sense of life's flow. A tiny flame against the darkness, speaking softly. Your time matters, because you are here to spend it.